Hello, and welcome to another live stream of the Secure Cloudcast. I'm your host, Michael Foster, and I'm joined by the lovely Kim Carlos. We
Hello.
have a packed show for you today. Kim, why don't you take us through what we're going to be talking about?
Sure. So we're going to focus today on more about the security supply chain, and we're going to focus on validated patterns.
Yes, we have a packed house. We got three of the
Yes.
authors and contributors to the DevSecOps validated pattern. It is validated pattern. I believe they're going to come in and correct the record of everything we say. But I just want to get into a couple of the notes before we bring them in. We have just some quick announcements. KubeCon EU is coming up. That's going to be April 17th to 21st in Amsterdam. We're looking forward to a lot of announcements coming from that. So we're going to be watching it. We'll wrap it all up for you, and we'll hopefully be back on the last week there of April to talk about all the security let's say discussions that are happening, as I'm sure there's going to be some announcements. Of course, we have to talk about Summit. Kim, I know we have some announcements coming up. Didn't know if you wanted to
Yeah.
dive into it. What can we talk about? There's going to be some big
We
things
can't.
happening, right? We can't. All right. Well then.
But we have a whole lot of fun surprises that are coming up. So just know it's coming.
Yeah, and that's May 23rd, 25th. That's in Boston, and Ansible Fest is at the same time as well. I'm going to be there. We're going to be talking OpenShift Platform Plus and giving a hands-on demo. So if you're interested, tickets are available. And of course, Boston's just so lovely in May. So we look forward to seeing you there. I think, well, there's some big news and then some news that's upcoming. Cert Manager 1.0 is officially available, GA. So I know that Angeli and some of the product managers have been working very, very hard to get that out. So Cert Manager 1.0 is live. And I could tell you that just from managing certifications in OpenShift and with ACS, that can somewhat be, a little bit of a pain. So definitely worth checking it out. I put the link in the chat, and I'll try to post them to YouTube as well after. If you have any questions, feel free. And the last thing, Kim, I know you've been working on it as well. We have a new release coming up. Did you want to, anything that you wanted to talk about for 4.0?
I can't talk about it yet.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, so if you're part of the community in StackRHACS, you know that we've been talking about 4.0 for a while. 3.74 just came out, and there's questions about, hey, why are we going to 4.0? And that's largely because of some breaking changes. We're changing the backend, so it's going to Postgres as the default database. That really allows us to scale, especially with the cloud service that we're coming out with. It also allows for some new features that were not necessarily available in the CLI and things of that sort. So again, 4.0 is going to be extremely exciting. The goal is mid to late April, but stay tuned, and especially if you're in that community Slack channel for StackRHACS, you're going to get all your notifications and updates there. And you can ask us questions because the next community meeting is the second Tuesday of April. So Matthias and myself will be answering all your questions for 4.0 updates, breaking changes, and the like. But of course, we have a support matrix for 6 months, so you don't necessarily need to upgrade. But I can tell you, everything. I'm getting some back channel ping saying everything is not so secret on the Secure Cloudcast. Yeah. But listen, we want you to go check out 3.74 because there's a ton of new features, a new network graph, new policy collections, and whole policy workflow. So it's definitely worth checking out. Kim, anything else that you wanted to talk/not talk about, secret, not secret, before we bring the gang on in?
It's just one of those podcasts or today where we can't talk about all the things, but we'll be talking about a lot in a short amount of time. So I think let's bring in our guest.
Yeah, let's bring him on in. So there's three. I don't know exactly what we're going to introduce them in. We'll see how they appear. We have William Henry, we have Johnny Rickard, and we have Anthony Herr. Hopefully I got all that right. Fellas, you've all been working on the DevSecOps and the validated patterns for a long time now. Starting with William, you want to introduce yourself? Let us know what you've been up to and what you do at Red Hat.
Sure. William Henry. I'm a senior distinguished engineer at Red Hat. I've been here 15 years almost. So I'm very excited to be on this Secure Cloudcast. I love the intro music. It's very Pink Panther-ish. It's very funky as well.
Is.
So I really like that. I've been working on lots of different projects over the years at Red Hat, but more recently I've been working on this validated patterns effort, which we'll get into in a moment, and specifically working with Anthony and Johnny on the MultiCluster Defsecops pattern, which is all about security and stuff like that. So
cool.
Yeah, a lot of questions for you guys coming up on that. Johnny, why don't you introduce yourself? And you're a live stream natural, so I'm sure the people watching already know you, but give it a go.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty much known everywhere, famous. I sign autographs to Target and Walmart all the time. It's my thing. But no, I'm Johnny Rickard. I've been at Red Hat for 7 years, and I'm on the validated patterns team with William and Anthony. I've been doing this, I think, coming up on 2 years this summer. I think will be my time on service or whatever. But I came from consulting. I was an architect for a while. I'm also the co-host on Ask an OpenShift Admin with Andrew Sullivan. So if you want to nerd out on OpenShift and all things OpenShift, make sure you come check us out on Wednesdays.
Cool.
Shameless plug. Couldn't help it.
Great show. I've watched it several times.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And Anthony, why don't you round us out there?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Just amazed by my two cohorts and you lovely people in the Secure Cloud Quest. My name's Anthony Herr. I'm the product manager associated with this initiative out of the CTO's organization, helping to create this over the last, I guess, 3 years almost.
Wow.
It's been a long time that we've been working on the framework. And at Red Hat, I've been here about 6. So it does help to find a good idea and kind of hold on to it with dear life. I mean, just making sure that we can move these forward. Yeah, these two are the technical brains behind this initiative. I'm just here from the effort itself on the PM side. So I'm looking forward to any conversation we have.
Yeah, and thanks y'all for coming. Speaking of which, I'm going to toss it right back to you. The effort itself. How long has it been around? What was the reason for creating things like a validated pattern? Just curious how it got off the ground.
Well, I guess I can start if you want, Johnny, or do you want to?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
From my side, William brought this to our attention, kind of working through when I joined Red Hat specifically, I came in as a PM for a couple different products, and my goal was to just try to have a little experience with the products. So I took our reference architectures. I got to about the 3rd step, and it broke. And that's just because they're not maintained over time. It's the way documentation works, is if you don't have a constant update process, that even the best procedures will go out of date. So we've had this initiative so that we can have more living use cases and focus on the business outcomes, looking at things at a portfolio level, not at a single product level. So we have these use cases, and the main goal is to keep them active, keep them alive over a long period of time, so customers can trust what we put together is something that they can use.
Yes. So from an engineering perspective, it makes a lot of sense, because when you have a portfolio of open source projects and products like Red Hat does, it's very difficult to keep all that maintained and to test everything, right? And so testing every single combination of all of these different products together is just too difficult and too daunting. However, if we see patterns that are being developed within customers or partners, and we take those in-house and we try to automate them and run them through continuous integration processes, then we can kind of say, hey, this architecture, this deployment, this pattern, it still works. Or we can say it's broken, and that's what happened. Because if we can turn around and identify where patterns get broken, then we're making sure that customers and partners aren't discovering it first. Mm-hmm. We're helping them. We're preempting that, because when you have all these things working together, it gets very complicated, very complex. There's a lot of handshaking and plumbing and all that good stuff between different processes, and trying to keep that working is hard. But if you're using things like GitOps and DevOps and DevSecOps, then you have a much better chance through automation of making sure things stay in sync and stay working.
Yeah, and just to pile on, right? Like it comes down to, the idea is like trying to show our customers the art of the reality versus the art of the possible, right? Because like we've all dealt with technical engineers where they come in, they whiteboard it, and they're like, oh man, this is so awesome. And then when you try and implement that thing, it's like, well, okay, this doesn't necessarily work this way because of this. We actually put all like the rubber to the road, right? So we do all the integrations between the products, and so when we're showing off like the pattern, the demo on the pattern, it's actually a working, living, breathing demo that can work. That like it's a tool set that you can use in your environment if that's the thing that you're trying to go after. So I mean, I think that's the important part. the other piece to it is that, well, I lost my train of thought, so I'll come back to it. I'll figure it out.
I have a question
talking
teed up
about
for you,
completely
actually.
lost
No, it's fine. So I posted a link to the validated patterns in the chat, but this has been an issue for a while. I know it had been a community pattern for a significant time before. Can you explain the difference before we deep dive into the actual technology? Community pattern versus validated, the value of each?
This, I mean, we can all answer, but this is an Anthony question. Anthony.
Yeah. There you go.
I was going to put in what you have up there is our Red Hat GitOps Patterns site.
Yeah.
Most of the material we have is with customers, partners, and services organizations kind of focused on it, is in our hybrid cloud patterns. And we'll put a different link in there, but it has the community patterns in it. So from a community perspective, the goal is to have as small or as large of a GitOps building block as you'd like. Our stuff is all very modular. So if you'd like storage from one vendor or another, you can pull what we have out and replace it with what you'd like very easily, and it's all customizable. From that perspective, community is driven by anyone. It is a community. If you'd like to add something in there, please feel free to do so and work with us, engage with the team, and add in your components or your services. The validated patterns is something that Red Hat does to CI, to test, to ensure that those living workflows continue to work, that we have these use cases that are built out and they maintain their use. They continue to be functional. They continue to deploy correctly. End to end, all the APIs are connecting the way that the use case is expected to, from the beginning to the end of that demo. And that includes the deployment, the operators, OpenShift, the security, lots of individual components. And so anytime one of those services changes, we're going through and including it in our CI to test again.
And when we CI, we're CIing right now across the three major public clouds or hyperscalers. So it's AWS, Azure, and GCP. So we deploy OpenShift on any of those, and for different versions of it. So it could be 4.10, 4.9, 4.11, 4.12, depending on when we started off the pattern. And then we test it on all three platforms for those specific versions and all the different products that are the sort of latest on that version. And we make sure that as new products come on board, things don't break. So we have a full CI process that flags us through Slack and tells us, hey, last night this thing broke because, there was an upgrade to Kafka or something like that, or OpenShift pipelines or something. And so that's really important too. And one of the things I would say about the DevSecOps one, which is kind of unique, is that we are CIing it right now because it's in process with some different partners and customers. We can't really say it's in production yet, but we're anticipating it quite a bit. So even though it's marked as community, we're still doing CI on it at the moment. So that's good.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's a good point. And part of the community patterns is everything's open source, right? So people can go grab the GitHub repository. Like you said, they can add their specific components or swap specific things. Is that correct?
That's correct. So the idea would be that, for example, let's take the DevSecOps pattern. If there was a tool as part of the pipelines that you wanted to swap out, maybe you wanted to use Claire instead of something like StackRox for the vulnerability scanning, sure. You could swap that out if you wanted to make sure that that's part of your pipeline tasks. So Johnny, did you want to add to that too?
Yeah, it's the idea is that you take the common part of our framework. Well, that's our bread and butter, right? Like that's where you get all of the validated pattern stuff out, right? The demo sits on top of it. So with MultiCluster DefSecOps as an example, each one of those pieces, like you guys are well aware, there's a tool for everything. And if there's a tool, there's probably 4 tools, and everybody has an opinion on which one is better. And so the idea is that you can take the tool that you want and plug it in, and then you might have to put the glue code together, right? You might have to bring the Helm chart in and put some of the API calls together to get it working. But but that's the idea. It's an 80% throw, and then you just come in and you do the last mile kind of thing, and you've got a reusable pattern that you can deploy in your cluster.
And okay, I think when I was reviewing all the code and everything that went into it, I think that just the sheer scale of what needs to happen for you to have like supply chain security, everything signed and validated all the way to runtime, it was kind of eye-opening. So I think part of those patterns really gives you a sense of what's necessary, right?
Right, and
absolutely.
it's an important thing that Johnny brings up too, is that a lot of the times we'll talk about a specific architecture working in the field. We'll say, hey, this worked, right? But without the code behind it, it's not very clear how it worked, right? And so, as you probably know, a lot of the operators that we use today are often quite merely installers, right? You deploy the operator, but you don't have everything that you need to be up and running, and you certainly don't have it integrated with things. And so part of what patterns is we can install things, but we also have to configure them within the architecture. So that's what I was talking about earlier with the plumbing. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of handshaking between, particularly if you're doing multiple clusters, like in the DevSecOps one, we have hub clusters and development clusters and production clusters. In our industrial edge pattern, we have data centers and edge devices out on factories, edge clusters on factories. So when you're doing that sort of thing, there's a lot of like, hey, you need to have this API link and you need to have this secret to contact me, and here's my token, and all those things have to be moved around. And so with a validated pattern, we don't just bring up things and install a bunch of operators. We have to use Helm charts then to say, okay, now that everything's installed, we need to get it all configured. And also, as Johnny can attest to, the order in which you have to do things also matters. And so that's why we're using OpenShift GitOps, which is based in Argo CD, to provide us this sort of sync waves and sync phases that allow us to make sure that certain components come up first so that other dependent components can, speak to it. So the pattern won't fail on install because something doesn't exist yet, right? So there's a lot going on between GitOps and between multi-cluster management and secrets handling and API URLs and all that sort of stuff that has to be done. And that's what we're doing with the patterns. And validated, the DevSecOps pattern is particularly gnarly, right, Johnny?
Oh yeah. And just real quick, like I do want to give a shout out to Jafar from the product management team. They came to us with this, and so we partnered with them to put their pipeline into the validated pattern. So like this isn't just the Johnny William and Anthony show, right? We did definitely have a lot of assistance from Jafar. So just want to give him a shout out too.
Yeah, and I'd also like to give a shout out to Gus Parvin, who also worked providing a lot of the policies from advanced cluster management to make sure we could use policies to enforce certain rules across the multi-cluster environment.
Oh, that's cool. Very cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Speaking of which, so you gave us the whole life cycle behind validated and community patterns. We've talked about the multi-cluster DevSecOps pattern. You want to tell us what's involved with it? What was the goal? Because I know I've watched Jafar work on this for a year and a half. I remember when we first got acquired, StackRox, there's rumblings of this getting created. So was hoping you could, talk about the use case you're trying to solve and all the pieces that are involved in it.
The history kind of behind it was we were looking at OpenShift Platform Plus and those components first. And we were saying, well, okay, what is OpenShift Platform Plus? And it's made up of these different components, Open Data Foundation and Advanced Cluster Security and Advanced Cluster Management and Quay Enterprise. And we were saying, okay, yeah, but what is it really for? And then when we were looking at the secure supply chain or supply chain, software supply chain security, we said that's the use case, right? And we saw a need within the within Red Hat and within the community and with partners to say, how do we manage this rapid onslaught of CI/CD securely. And we thought that's the use case. That's what we have to go after. And so assembling the OPP components across multiple clusters and handshaking and all that. And then the big work that Jafar and Johnny were working on was around, and some other folks as well, that were working around the pipelines within the development environment too, which I think is what we're really focusing on today a bit. Johnny, anything?
Yeah, and honestly, at the end of the day, the idea is to enable our customers to use the things that they bought, right? So a lot of times we'll see where a customer they bought all these tools, right? They bought OPP, right? But they're like, okay, I now don't know what to do with this. And so the idea is like, okay, well, here, let me give you an example of what you can do to get going. It's to help get rid of the empty cluster, right? Or you have the customer they're on the fence about buying something, and now we're like, hey, well, here's what you can actually do with this. So I think that those are really the problems that we're trying to solve. Get people using it, get people, buzzword bingo here, shifting left with security, right, and baking things in, and actually making that real. I was on a project a couple of years ago with the Air Force, and they were real big on this DevSecOps. So they wanted to essentially do what we're doing now, and they did an awesome job with the tools that they had. But as things have evolved and the technology's gotten better, right? I mean, this is just the evolution of what they were doing, and now we're doing it within Red Hat, and hopefully through the broader community.
For a lot of people, it's very daunting, right? You look at DevSecOps and you go, oh, how am I possibly going to try to wire all this thing up, and who's going to pay for it, and what are the costs involved, and what are the tools I need, and can I be confident in the tools? But they're also dealing with the fact that, as I talked about earlier, this accelerated CI/CD space with things like containers and automation and container platforms and all that good stuff. People are becoming very, very productive, want to push things to production as fast as possible. But you also want to have the confidence that you can trust what you're putting into production. And so by using GitOps, by using DevOps and DevSecOps, you essentially are providing a mitigation. You're providing a level of risk mitigation that you can continue to be doing things at an accelerated pace, but because of the steps you have within the security process, that you're confident that what you're putting into production is safe and trusted.
Cool. So you mentioned Jafar, and I kind of know his name to be synonymous with supply chain security here. He is quite the SME. And I was wondering if you can talk about sort of the biggest hurdles in the adoption of supply chain security principles.
Yeah, I think, in my experience, right, it's been the vendor lock-in, right? Like that's a huge issue with people is vendor lock-in. And so I think when we go in and we talk about like, hey, we're Red Hat OpenShift, at the end of the day, Red Hat OpenShift is Kubernetes, right? It's just enterprise Kubernetes. But if you look at the tools that we're using throughout the pipeline, we're using all open source products. So if you look at like within the actual pipeline itself, we're using things like Nexus, SonarQube, Gatling. There's all kinds of tools that are upstream and that we can use and that are interchangeable. So if you have your own, then you could use that as well. And the other part is it's cost, right? And that kind of goes. It's not synonymous, but it's kind of like it goes hand in hand with vendor lock-in, right? I could get the same thing for free, downstream, or I could pay a little bit less for this. But I think that at the end of the day, it's a matter of just going in, showing what we can do with OPP and the tooling, and say how can we put your tools on this pipeline and make this work. But yeah, I think just initially those are the big ones that I see a lot. Like if I go back to my 8 billion consulting engagements that I had, like the one thing I probably heard the most was vendor lock-in. We don't want to be vendor lock-in. So yeah. That's pretty crazy.
Also, I think the complexity itself can be very, as I said earlier, can be very daunting. And the very fact that with this GitOps-based approach, we can rapidly deploy a complete architecture all wired up together and show people the different components, show owners, partners, or whatever, the different components, and say, look, this is not out of your reach. This is something that can be done for you in an automated fashion. You can maintain, you can fork from the patterns upstream, and essentially then make your changes on your own branches as needed. And you can get, again, we're talking about life cycle here. You can then turn around and continue to pull down components that you think will benefit you, so you can keep in sync with the pattern. And also, if you, as a customer partner, see something that the pattern could benefit from, you can do a pull request and bring it up. So we want a community around this. We want people to get involved. We're still trying to work that out. As much as we say it, we really, we have a few pull requests on the queue here that we still need to address, but that's the goal of this.
Yeah, thanks for that. Just as somebody who deals with analysts on a day-to-day, I think that there's a big disconnect between what's implemented and practical in day-to-day activities and then the bleeding edge features that are being requested. So I really think it's the pattern has really driven the conversation around like what features are useful. I know that SBOMs is coming up in ACS and StackRox this year, and a lot of it was basically because we need to make sure that SBOMs are properly taken care of and that the right people are making sure that that we can map these to vulnerabilities, that we can accurately get an assessment of risk without just chucking information in, right? So all those integrations and those practical use cases help feed and make other products better, right? It's not just a smorgasbord of integrations that barely anybody uses. So I think getting that feedback right from the community really helps, right?
When I heard the term SBOM, by the way, I was like, what is this? It sounds so scary and frightening. And then I was like looking it up. Oh, it's a software bill of materials. We've had these forever. But the difference is when you've got a rapidly changing CI/CD pipeline that's pushing things out, you've got to make sure that your bill of materials is well known and verified and signed and all that good stuff. So yeah, that's a very important and a very important piece of this. And the technologies change, but I think that the value of the patterns is that we're not stuck in any time, right? We're not stuck at this is how you deploy it forever. What we're saying is this is what we're deploying right now with the tools that are available today. But we believe the pattern framework allows us to swap. It's again, we're using all open standard-based approach like GitOps and Helm charts and all that cool stuff, operators if they're available. So we're not doing anything new or anything proprietary, but what we are doing is trying to automate it in such a way that we could turn around tomorrow and say, you know what, we don't want to use that particular vault anymore. We want to use a different vault. Because some development in the industry and in the enterprise security industry says we need this particular feature on it. And so we can adopt that. That's really important.
That is really important because that changes all the time.
Yeah.
And one thing I do want to circle. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Going, Johnny.
Sorry. One thing, Michael, to kind of go back to what you're saying too, right? Like the supply chain security right now, like it's not a new concept, but it's still it's emerging tech, right? Like and it's fluid right now, because I think that like over the last couple of years we've seen that like, okay, we really need to get our heads around this right now. Like that we've got some serious issues, and if we don't do something about it, then we're going to have another. I don't want to call them out, but we're going to have another one of the big supply chain issues that's going to affect everybody, and we definitely don't want to be in the news for that, and nobody does, right? And so. But that's just it though, that as this tech is emerging, it is coming out and we're getting better and better with it. That's the tooling is going to get better around it. And then we're gonna have better standards, because right now it is very fluid. So just hopefully we'll have something concrete soon.
Yeah.
I feel like that's our jam though, like as Red Hat, like that's the time when we come in and can shine, because of the way we do things,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. And we're a huge partner, right? With it's us and Google and with the Salsa framework and stuff like that. So I do see us being a big player in this, because this, like you said, this is what we do. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So with my marketing hat on, I'm going to challenge you guys to come up with your best like 25, 50 word segment of, if you implement MultiCluster DevSecOps pattern, what is your outcome? Is it, like for me, it's signed and authorized build to the build, deploy, and runtime process in whatever your application is on Kubernetes or something like that, right? I'm kind of, because like you said, some of the parts are swappable. You don't necessarily need to do enforcement at runtime. So I'm kind of curious, what you've seen and how it's been applied. Because like, again, it's pretty daunting. So I'm looking for that like one.
I'm going to jump in. Yeah, I'll jump in first, because even though I'm like afraid to, but I think for me, it's one of the things that we're seeing from a practical perspective, particularly with some of the our system integrator partners, is it's really about a kind of time to value for customers and partners. They want to implement something as daunting, as I said, as this multi-cluster DevSecOps environment with development clusters and production clusters and central control plane clusters and that sort of thing. They don't know how to get there. They want to do a lot of work, but they don't want to be doing stuff on their own. And so for me, the validated patterns for DevSecOps, and this is not 25 words, but let's say I'm starting now, right? If I'm starting now, if I'm starting now with that context, I would say it's really about an automated best practices for getting getting supply chain security for your software in a automated and continuously integrated way where it's tested, etc. That would be for me. Anthony might have a better product manager definition.
Not sure I can do it in 25 words. That's the problem.
Right, that's the thing.
Oh,
This is an example. In a reference architecture, a golden build. It's a way to do this if you're an admin just getting started, to show you how to get it done quickly. And from there, it's modifiable, editable to do it the way you want to do it over time.
Yeah, one of the things I'd say too is that, and I'm going to let Johnny jump in on the pipeline side, but a lot of people focus when it comes to secure supply chain just on the pipeline, right? And they say, these are the steps that need to be happening. And so therefore, maybe I need to install these sort of tools along the way, or they need to be available in some way, right? However, the pattern is also about making sure that all of that infrastructure for those tools is available. So it makes sure, for example, that advanced cluster security gets deployed on a main hub as both secured and a central hub, right? So that other clusters can contact it for cluster security, making sure it's compliant, all that good stuff, but also for call out for vulnerability scanning, etc. So setting that up is complex, and making sure it connects to different clusters like production and development is also complex. Setting up a central registry and the handshaking between something like Quay Enterprise and the Quay Bridge on the development clusters and on the production clusters. There's a whole bunch of pieces that need to be done. So on one side, there's that whole complex setup. And then the other side, there's, okay, now that it's all set up, what does the pipeline look like, and what are all the tools? And Johnny, I'll let you jump in on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to do my 25 to 50 word thing really quick, though.
Yeah.
I think it's an enterprise ready integrated build system, right? I think that's what you're going to get out of it, because at the end of the day, you're going to get OpenShift Platform Plus as a foundation, right? So that's going to be across your multiple clusters, and then on top of that, it's going to be that tooling that you want integrated with that enterprise ready infrastructure, and then now your processes, or our processes that you can adopt or not, will be available to you for your builds, and then that allows you to promote. We don't do releases in this, but like the idea is there, right? Where you have the concept of going from dev to stage to production, right? So like at the end of the day, it's an enterprise integration build system that's going to help you start your DevSecOps journey.
There you go.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because coming from the StackRox side, especially pre-acquisition, we're coming in, we're taking a different approach to containers and container security. It's a new paradigm. And half of the challenge was just figuring out how mature certain companies were. Did they have a process where all the applications internally were following the same build system? Because if that was the case, then it was pretty easy to implement a security control in it and actually do it at scale, right? So, but then sometimes you come in and every single team has a different build system. They're doing something different. Well, how does the security team come in and give, practical advice upstream?
Yeah.
So
and how do you roll it into that, right? I mean, like if everybody's got their own thing, then whose thing is the best thing, Yeah.
And so I feel like you said, that build process and setting a standard practice for, hey, this is how we're going to build and deploy and manage at runtime, Well, then now you can bring in your security tools. It doesn't have to be ACS. It can be other, partners that we have and things like that. You can bring those in and make their controls even stronger, right? It makes those security tools perform even better instead of focusing on the marketing features of, let's say, the next top thing, right?
And to me, the thing I really like the most, and I mean, there's a lot of things I like, right? And this is just, I'm a fanboy of what we do, so I mean, it's also, a thing, but, we also want to involve the community, and I think that that's something that, like, from a Red Hat product perspective, like, that's something that's awesome, right? We talk about open source and community, but like, I really think that we embrace that. If you have a tool that's better than the one that we have, then we want to use that, because we want to use the best tool. It doesn't necessarily have to be ours. To your point about if you want to use, say, Twistlock over ACS or whatever, right? Then we can help you do that if you wanted to, but it's all about it's how do we enable you to do better?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, being open source and freely available to do it, right? I think that's one of the big advantages, obviously. Speaking of which, so I put this question here. I'm trying to figure out exactly how to word it, but I think one of the biggest challenges towards like the next step of that build process is the efficiency. Because I think, as you build more and more controls, you're also slowing down builds a little bit too. You're increasing cycles, which means added cost. So how do you practically fit into the different systems? Is it like, hey, let's start with like one check and we're going to limit vulnerabilities. And then the next one's like, let's just inform just to make sure that the signature from the build to deploy is the same, right? What are some, let's say, considerations when you're thinking about implementing a strategy like this, especially around efficiency?
Do you want me to go first, Johnny?
It's up to you.
Yeah, Johnny and I have been talking about this. The way you phrased it right now is very interesting, that question, because for me, I would not have looked at it as starting to introduce different concepts of the security supply chain one at a time. I would have looked at it as, here is a pipeline, a security pipeline that already exists, that have the tools available. I'd rather do it as a sort of an application at a time, or, and let's see how that works, and let's see what happens, and understand the pipeline. And one of the other things that, just from the previous question, was on the pipelines, we want to be able to support pipelines that are kind of, if you like, OpenShift instance type of pipeline, but we also are can take advantage of pipelines as code, which allows you to have the pipeline as part of the Git repo where your application is as well. But I think to this question, I guess you could pull some pieces out and try to test minimal, but I'd be more inclined to go, look, this is a pipeline, let's do it. But with regards to cost, Johnny,
so there's some things, Michael, that we do like right away, right? Like there's certain things that we just don't want in the builds at all. And one of those is like a package manager, right? So what we'll do is we'll use an ACS policy that will, during the build, go out and say, hey, you've got RPM or you've got DNF or micro DNF or whatever installed. And so we'll kick that out in the build. So essentially what we want to do is we want to have that image come up, go through its process, do its thing. If that's something that, like, if that's what our organization doesn't want, right? I think a good idea is we want to reduce the attack surface, and so we want to pull out that package manager. So all right, let's go ahead and rip that out. Now let's go through our build, and essentially, like, we do go through and test each one of those tasks, like, okay, can we build and deploy it this way? Are my scans actually catching what I think that they should be scanning? So in the sense of the pattern and reusability, I think that that's where we're adding efficiency, because you, like, when you take this pipeline and you run it, you're like, okay, this has already been through the ringer. This is in CI. We're testing the crap out of this, But the other thing I think that we do is, once you get off of that hub and the development clusters, we really start to right size the cluster, right? So we really want to make sure that the cluster is only doing what the cluster is supposed to be doing. So we might have like an ACS secure that's sitting out on that cluster, so that way we can scan. But then it should only be that application that we're deploying into staging and then promoting up to the next environment. So essentially, we might have a big cluster up front, and it might cost us a lot up front in either development or resources. But as we get further and further along and closer to production and our customer, that actually gets smaller and smaller, because we've right-sized the cluster now. We've only got the resources that we need to run our thing, and and that's really it. I mean, it's the tooling and stuff like that. We test it and try and make it as easy as possible to reuse. But
and obviously, the more application workloads you can put through this, the greater efficiencies and in terms of costs that you're getting, right? Like this is, probably too big for a single small, app, right? And certainly all our demos are that, right? Our demos, like you'd probably look and go, oh my gosh, pet clinic. We're doing a pet clinic and we've got this huge infrastructure to support it. But you think of, much larger applications and multiple applications and applications that are connected together, and then it becomes a much smarter deployment. Also, things that we're doing, like concentrating a lot of the central control on a single cluster, having different development clusters, are sharing a cluster for developers as is also possible, and so you get a scale there for developers. They're all participating in the single pipeline that's are at least a single platform with pipelines that are assured and tested, etc. And then when it comes to production environments, those are very important to be right-sized, right? So they could be even single node, OpenShift, or they could be, potentially we're looking at patterns that are where the edge is just RHEL with Podman and stuff like that as well. So there's a lot of efficiencies you can gain from this, but probably right up front, you're going to take a little hit in deploying this pattern to try to for a single app. But you're going to have to do it to try to, like, once you get it, you can start unloading your container native, your cloud native workloads as fast as possible.
Yeah, I really like that you touched on a realistic situation, which is it's going to hit you with costs, especially if you're doing a migration like that around a complete reorg, container security, DevSecOps approach. I think a lot of the messaging around Kubernetes adoption was that it's going to be cheaper, it's going to go to the cloud, you're going to deploy faster, when in reality, the first 2-3 years are normally never like that, right?
Yeah.
And I think part of this pattern is to say, hey, everybody get on the same page. Here's the pattern. Here's the build process. Also, your containers don't need to be 3 gigabits in size, because I've seen that, right?
Yes.
So it's like, hey, let's strip everything out. And then that's where the efficiencies come. And it's that visibility of, like, across teams that, you're shrinking the container footprint at the same time that you're making it more secure. Like, that's where you're really getting the value, right?
Yeah, it's certainly going to be more efficient than everybody having their own virtual machine infrastructure to manage their own apps, right? Mm-hmm. Once you get into the container environment and start using a container platform, you're already hitting economies of scale, right? But turning that into a secure supply chain with all the components, yes, that's going to be, you need to start getting as much workload on that as fast as possible once you have verified the deployment is the way you want it, and you're using the tools that you want, for sure. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a great conversation. Is there anything that you guys wanted to add? And if not, I'd love if we could tell people where they can go to learn more about open source projects.
I do have one thing really quick. From these patterns and other patterns perspectives, we do have a sizing guide on the website. So if you're really looking for what it would take to deploy a medical diagnosis or the DevSecOps pattern, you can go onto the site and it walks you through both the installation as well as what to expect just to try it out in a proof of concept environment in the cloud space. So these guys have done a great job in listing all that out, and I think it would be helpful if customers just want to take a look.
And one thing to add to that too is, like, because you brought a medical diagnosis, if you're going out and you're looking at these patterns, look at it beyond the initial demo, right? Think about like medical diagnosis is at the end of the day, it's really object detection, right? It's using a AI/ML pipeline to do object detection within images. Well, what else could be doing that, right? Like we could be looking at packages. We could be looking at people walking through machines at the airport through TSA and stuff like that. So try and think use cases beyond that. You might not be like, oh, okay, I don't care about X-rays, but like you might care about object detection in an image. With industrial edge, you might care about sensor data and the IoT devices, right, and how those things are interacting. We have Ansible Edge GitOps, right? How do I do things beyond, or how do I do things beyond OpenShift? I still have multiple environments. I may have a VMware environment. I may have a bare metal environment. How can I manage those resources within OpenShift? And so like we have these use cases. So if you look at them, it's one like right in your face. Like, yes, we have a demo for that. It's awesome. But at the end of the day, how do I take that and how do I make that work for me?
All right, Johnny, you're in charge of all the other use cases now. Go ahead. We need a couple new demos being built. Go for it.
I'm already in trouble. I can't do it anymore. Like,
No, I appreciate it. And we appreciate Johnny, Anthony, and William. We appreciate you coming on and talking about the community pattern, hopefully validated soon. We'll see you. We'll do a big announcement then. Until then, we have obviously KubeCon next month, Summit in May 23rd to 25th, and ACS 4.0 is out next month. So tune in to the show on the fourth Tuesday. And yeah, we'll be back with a new topic and new people. Other than that, Kim, take us away.
All right. Thanks so much for joining. We will see you next time. I'm Kim Carlos. Hasta la pasta.